The needle slides into my neck with the precision of a prayer, and for 17 seconds I remember my mother's face. Then the chemicals flood my system and Marcus Thale dies again. The same death I have experienced 47 times since they made me into this thing. The creature that wears his memories like ill-fitting clothes prepares for another hunt, another kill, another day of service to an emperor who demands monsters in his name. My name was once Marcus Thale, though that identity feels like something carved into stone and left to weather until only fragments remain legible. The flesh puppet they have created from his bones has no use for human names, only imperial designations. Eversor Primary. Asset classification, Omega 7. Status, primed for deployment. Current stimulant load, maximum sustainable. Estimated operational window, 6 hours before biological systems require recalibration. I am writing this during what the tech adepts call the lucidity window. Those precious moments between chemical cocktails when whatever remains of my original consciousness claws its way to the surface like a drowning man breaking through black water. The pharmaceutical symphony that transforms me into the Emperor's perfect killer is temporarily quiet, its chemical orchestra tuning their instruments between movements. Soon they will flood my veins with liquid madness again, and the thing I am becoming will take complete control. But for now, in this stolen fragment of awareness, someone needs to understand what they do to us here, what the Imperium creates when it decides that simple murder is insufficient for its purposes. The Officio Assassinorum does not post recruitment advertisements on Hive world message boards. We are not volunteers who answered the call to serve humanity's cause. We are harvested, processed, and rebuilt according to specifications that treat human consciousness as just another component to be optimized. The man I was died the moment my name appeared on their selection lists. What remains is a biological weapon that dreams sometimes of home. A killing machine wrapped in flesh that once knew the taste of his mother's cooking and the sound of children laughing in hab-block corridors. They took me from a penal colony on Mordian Septimus, where I had been serving a sentence for the grave crime of questioning why the planetary governor needed 17 personal pleasure yachts, while workers in the Prometheum refineries were dying of lung rot by age 30. The Imperium has many creative definitions of treason, and asking inconvenient questions about resource allocation apparently qualifies. In retrospect, the crime hardly mattered. They were not looking for the worst criminals or the most dangerous dissidents. They were shopping for raw materials, human beings whose disappearance would generate no significant paperwork and whose psychological profiles suggested they might survive the conversion process. The black ship that carried me away from everything I had ever known bore no markings that might identify its purpose or destination. Imperial records would show that Marcus Thale had died of radiation exposure in the prison mines, his body cremated and his ashes scattered according to standard penal colony protocols. As far as the official bureaucracy was concerned, I had ceased to exist the moment I stepped aboard that vessel. The 43 other prisoners who shared my transport were equally invisible to the vast administrative machinery that governs human life in the Imperium. We were kept in isolation cells barely large enough for a man to lie down, fed through slots in armored doors that opened according to schedules calculated to prevent any sense of routine or temporal orientation. The journey took weeks, though time becomes a meaningless concept when you are locked in a metal box with no reference points beyond the steady vibration of warp engines and the occasional shift in artificial gravity that suggests course corrections. I spent those endless hours trying to memorize my life, repeating names and faces in conversations like catechisms that might protect some fragment of my identity from whatever waited at our destination. My cellmate during the early part of the voyage was a man named Jarek Voss, a former Imperial Guard trooper who had been convicted of desertion after he abandoned his post to help evacuate civilians from an orc attack. We spoke in whispers during the first few days, sharing stories of our lives before imprisonment and speculating about our likely fate. Jarek had served with distinction for 15 years before his single act of compassion destroyed his career and landed him in the same transport as common criminals and political dissidents. He told me about his homeworld, an agricultural planet called Verdant Prime, where he had grown up on his family's grain farm before Imperial Guard recruiters arrived looking for fresh conscripts. He spoke of his wife and 2 children, left behind when the Guard shipped him off to fight in wars whose purposes he never fully understood. His voice carried the weight of a man who had seen too much death and finally chosen to save lives rather than take them, even knowing the cost such a choice would carry. "Whatever they're taking us to," he said one night as we listened to the ship's engines humming through the walls, "it's not justice. Men like us were not important enough for execution or life imprisonment. They're taking us somewhere to use us up, turn us into something that serves their purposes better than a quick death would." His words proved prophetic, though neither of us could have imagined the specific horror that awaited us at the end of our voyage. Jarek was among those who failed the initial medical screening, led away through sealed doors with the rest of the rejected candidates. I never learned what happened to him, but I sometimes hope his death was quick and that he never experienced the slow dissolution of identity that defines the Eversor conditioning process. The facility where they transformed us was built into an asteroid in a system whose name appears on no star charts accessible to conventional Imperial databases. Its chambers were carved from solid rock and lined with metal that reflected our footsteps in harsh echoes, creating an acoustic environment designed to prevent whispered conversations or coordinated resistance. Everything was sterile, efficient, optimized for purposes that became clear only gradually as we were processed through increasingly invasive stages of evaluation and preparation. The architecture itself was designed to inspire despair and submission. Corridors stretched for hundreds of meters without windows or decorative elements, their monotonous gray walls marked only by identification numbers and warning symbols in High Gothic. The lighting was harsh and constant, providing no variation that might indicate the passage of time or suggest any rhythm of day and night. The air carried the antiseptic smell of medical facilities mixed with the ozone scent of high-energy equipment operating at maximum capacity. The first phase was medical screening, though that term fails to capture the thoroughness of their examination. They subjected us to tests that mapped every aspect of our physiology with the precision normally reserved for sacred machine spirits. Bone density, neural response times, hormone production, genetic markers, psychological stress responses. Every measurable aspect of human function was catalogued and analyzed by servitors whose surgical implements moved with mechanical precision. The servitors themselves were disturbing hybrids of flesh and machinery, their human components clearly visible beneath the technological modifications that had transformed them into living instruments. Their faces retained enough human features to be recognizable as once people, but their expressions were completely vacant, their eyes holding no trace of personality or individual consciousness. They worked with the efficiency of machines while retaining just enough biological capability to perform delicate medical procedures that pure mechanical systems could not accomplish. They took tissue samples from every organ system, extracted bone marrow for genetic analysis, and drew what seemed like liters of blood for chemical testing. Neural probes were inserted into our skulls to measure brain activity patterns and map the specific architecture of our individual consciousness. The procedures were conducted without anesthesia, not from deliberate cruelty but from operational necessity. They needed to observe our pain responses and stress reactions as part of the overall assessment process. Of the 43 prisoners who had traveled with me, only 9 passed the initial screening. The selection criteria were never explained to us, but observation of the screening process suggested they were looking for specific combinations of physical resilience, psychological stability, and neural plasticity that would make successful conversion more likely. Age was clearly a factor, with all rejected candidates being either very young or older than their mid-30s. Prior military service seemed to be preferred but not essential. The rest were led away through doors marked with symbols in High Gothic that I could not read, their ultimate disposition left to our increasingly paranoid imagination. Those of us who remained were assigned new identification numbers and moved to a different section of the facility, where the real work began. Our old names were officially expunged from all records, replaced by alphanumeric designations that served to further distance us from our former identities. The transformation process starts with psychological conditioning, though that clinical term hardly captures the systematic annihilation of everything that makes a person human. They began by stripping away our memories with a precision that would have impressed the most devoted servants of the machine god. Chemical treatments dissolved the neural pathways that encoded personal history, while electromagnetic fields selectively disrupted brain activity in regions associated with individual identity and emotional attachment. The memory erasure was conducted in stages, allowing them to monitor our responses and adjust their techniques for maximum effectiveness. They started with recent memories, working backward through our personal histories like archaeologists excavating layers of accumulated experience. Childhood memories proved most resistant to chemical dissolution, requiring repeated treatments and increasingly powerful drugs to achieve complete elimination. I remember the exact moment when my mother's face began to fade from my consciousness. The technician administering the treatment was a thin man with augmented eyes that glowed with pale blue light as he monitored the electromagnetic patterns disrupting my brain activity. His voice was professionally neutral as he explained what was happening, as if describing a routine maintenance procedure rather than the systematic destruction of a human soul. Subject is experiencing resistance in the hippocampus region, he reported to his supervisors. Increasing field intensity to overcome naturally occurring memory retention barriers. Emotional associations appear particularly strong. Recommend additional chemical suppression to prevent reformation of dissolved neural pathways. The pain was indescribable. Not the sharp agony of physical injury, but something deeper and more fundamental. The sensation of pieces of yourself being torn away and discarded like unwanted components. Each memory that dissolved felt like a small death, the loss of some essential part of what had made Marcus Thale a unique individual rather than simply biological matter arranged in human form. But they did not simply erase us like data slates being prepared for new information. They replaced what they stole with something else entirely, implanting behavioral patterns and response mechanisms that served imperial purposes. Where Marcus Thale had felt love for his family, they installed an obsessive loyalty to the Golden Throne. Where he had known doubt and uncertainty, they created artificial certainty in the righteousness of every mission. Where he had possessed the capacity for mercy and moral complexity, they planted something cold and efficient that measured all existence in terms of target elimination protocols. The replacement process was even more invasive than the memory erasure, requiring direct manipulation of neural tissue to create artificial pathways that could carry the new behavioral imperatives. Microscopic probes were inserted deep into my brain to stimulate specific regions while suppressing others, gradually rewiring the fundamental architecture of thought and emotion. The procedures took place over weeks of careful adjustment, with each session building upon the modifications made during previous treatments. They showed me recordings of my own brain activity during these sessions, pointing out the changes in electrical patterns that indicated successful modification of my personality structure. The man observing these displays bore no resemblance to Marcus Thale, whose neural signature had been distinctive in its chaotic complexity. What they were creating was something simpler and more focused, a consciousness optimized for specific purposes rather than the messy diversity of normal human thought. The process was gradual, taking place over months of carefully calibrated treatments that allowed them to monitor our responses and adjust their methods accordingly. They learned from our resistance, adapting their techniques to overcome each individual's psychological defenses. Some prisoners broke quickly, their minds unable to withstand the assault on their fundamental sense of self. Others fought longer, clinging to fragments of identity even as the chemical tide dissolved the foundations of their consciousness. I lasted longer than most, perhaps because my original crime had required a certain stubborn independence of thought that translated into resistance to modification. But human willpower is no match for technologies perfected over millennia of practice. Eventually, even the most deeply held memories began to fade, worn away by drugs that rewrote the basic architecture of thought and emotion. The man who had questioned authority and demanded justice for the oppressed was gradually replaced by something that could kill without hesitation and follow orders without moral consideration. The physical modifications came next, and these were even more extensive than the mental reconditioning. They stripped my body down to its essential framework and rebuilt it according to specifications that prioritized lethality over human comfort. The process began with complete skeletal replacement, removing my natural bones piece by piece and installing adamantium-enhanced synthetic structures that could withstand impacts capable of shattering ceramite armor plating. The skeletal surgery alone took weeks to complete, with each bone being carefully measured and replaced with mechanical equivalents that maintained the same basic proportions while providing vastly superior strength and durability. My skull was opened and reinforced with additional plating to protect the enhanced brain tissue from battlefield trauma. My spine was replaced with an articulated metal framework that could support the additional weight of augmented organs while providing improved flexibility and shock absorption. My muscles were supplemented with artificial fibers that provided strength far beyond baseline human capability while maintaining the appearance of natural tissue. These synthetic muscle bundles were woven through my existing biological structures, creating a hybrid system that combined organic flexibility with mechanical power. The integration process required careful calibration to prevent the artificial components from overpowering the natural ones and causing catastrophic tissue damage. My organs were augmented or replaced entirely with mechanical equivalents designed to function under conditions that would kill unmodified people within minutes. My heart became a dual-chamber pump capable of circulating blood at pressures that would rupture normal cardiovascular systems. My lungs were enhanced with additional filtering capacity that allowed me to breathe in toxic environments while extracting maximum oxygen from each breath. But the most significant changes were made to my nervous system, the delicate network of electrical impulses that controls every aspect of biological function. They rewired my brain to process sensory input at superhuman speeds, allowing me to react to threats faster than conscious thought could follow. They enhanced my pain tolerance to levels that bordered on complete numbness, ensuring that injuries would not interfere with mission completion. Most importantly, they installed the stimulant delivery system that would become the defining feature of my new existence. The stimulant system consists of microscopic dispensers embedded throughout my circulatory network, each one capable of releasing precise doses of chemical cocktails designed to enhance specific aspects of combat performance. The dispensers themselves are marvels of miniaturization, containing enough active compounds to support multiple activation cycles while remaining small enough to avoid detection by conventional medical scanning equipment. Some chemicals increase reaction speed and muscular coordination to levels that allow me to dodge projectile weapons at close range. Others suppress fear responses and emotional reactions that might interfere with tactical decision-making. The most potent combinations induce a state of controlled berserker rage that makes me capable of incredible feats of violence while maintaining just enough cognitive function to complete assigned objectives. The installation process required the creation of an entirely new circulatory subsystem, with artificial vessels and nerve pathways connecting the dispensers to monitoring systems embedded in my modified brain tissue. Chemical sensors throughout my body provide constant feedback about stimulant levels and biological responses, allowing the automated systems to adjust dosages for optimal performance while preventing lethal overdoses. When the stimulants are active, I cease to be entirely human. I become something faster, stronger, and infinitely more dangerous than any baseline person could imagine. My perception of time slows to a crawl, allowing me to observe the trajectory of incoming bullets and adjust my movement accordingly. My strength increases to levels that permit me to tear through power armor with my bare hands. Most significantly, my capacity for violence becomes unlimited, unconstrained by the psychological barriers that prevent normal humans from committing acts of extreme brutality. The first time they activated the full system, I understood what they had made me into. The chemicals flooded my brain with artificial clarity that reduced all existence to simple binary choices: target or non-target, threat or irrelevant, alive or requiring termination. The complex moral reasoning that had once defined Marcus Thale's approach to the world was replaced by tactical analysis so pure and efficient that it felt like a religious experience. I could see every possible angle of attack, every potential weapon, every weakness in enemy defenses with crystalline clarity. The sensation was unlike anything normal human consciousness could experience. Colors became more vivid and significant. Sounds resolved into precise directional indicators. Spatial relationships crystallized into mathematical certainties that my enhanced mind could process instantaneously. At the same time, emotional responses were chemically suppressed to prevent them from interfering with tactical analysis, leaving me in a state of perfect calm that bordered on euphoria. But the system came with costs that became apparent only when the chemicals wore off and my original consciousness struggled back to the surface. The drugs that enabled superhuman performance were gradually destroying my organic components, burning away brain tissue and organ function with each activation cycle. More insidiously, they were erasing whatever remained of my original personality, replacing human thought patterns with artificial imperatives that served imperial objectives above all other considerations. I could feel myself disappearing piece by piece, memory by memory, as the conditioning achieved deeper integration with my modified physiology. The man named Marcus Thale had existed once, had possessed hopes and fears and people he cared about deeply. But that person was fading like a weak Vox signal overwhelmed by static, his voice growing fainter with each passing day until only fragments remained. The training that followed my physical modification was designed to integrate these new capabilities into a coherent operational framework. The facility contained extensive training areas that could simulate every conceivable combat environment, from urban warfare scenarios to zero-gravity operations aboard space hulks. Each training session was carefully monitored to evaluate our performance and identify areas requiring additional conditioning or modification. We were taught to kill in every conceivable manner that human ingenuity could devise, from crude bludgeoning techniques to subtle poisoning methods to explosive devices capable of leveling entire city districts. The instruction was comprehensive and methodical, covering not just the mechanical aspects of violence but the psychological techniques necessary to overcome natural human reluctance to commit acts of extreme brutality. More importantly, we were conditioned to suppress any remaining moral qualms about our actions through repeated exposure to scenarios that normalized extreme violence as a legitimate tool of imperial policy. The training scenarios became progressively more challenging, both tactically and ethically, designed to push our enhanced capabilities to their limits while eliminating any vestige of conscience that might interfere with mission completion. They started with targets that were easy to hate, captured traitors and heretics whose crimes against the Imperium were extensively documented through vid recordings and witness testimony. These individuals had committed genuine atrocities against innocent civilians, making their elimination feel like justice rather than murder. The stimulant system made the actual killing effortless, flooding our brains with chemicals that transformed violence into a technical exercise devoid of emotional weight. The first training elimination I performed involved a captured chaos cultist who had been responsible for the deaths of several hundred Imperial citizens during a ritual sacrifice intended to summon demons. The target was secured in a specially designed chamber that allowed for multiple elimination methods while containing any potential supernatural manifestations that might result from the cultist's death. Under full stimulant enhancement, I approached the problem of killing this individual as an engineering challenge rather than a moral dilemma. The chemicals had suppressed any capacity for empathy or revulsion, leaving only tactical analysis and technical curiosity about the most effective methods for achieving permanent termination. I experimented with various approaches, measuring the effectiveness of different techniques while documenting the results for future reference. When the stimulants wore off hours later, I was left with perfect memories of what I had done but no emotional connection to the actions. The detailed recollections felt like someone else's experiences, observed with clinical interest rather than personal involvement. This disconnection between action and emotional consequence became the defining characteristic of my new existence, allowing me to accumulate an extensive catalog of violent experiences without the psychological damage that would destroy normal human operatives. But gradually the targets became more ambiguous, their guilt less certain, and their crimes more philosophical than practical. Suspected collaborators whose only evidence of treachery was association with known dissidents. Imperial officials whose loyalty was questioned because they had implemented policies that deviated from orthodox doctrine. Civilians whose misfortune was being present when political necessity demanded dramatic demonstrations of imperial power. Each mission required us to suppress more of our human instincts, to prioritize operational success over moral considerations that had once seemed fundamental to civilized existence. The stimulant system made this progression possible by chemically blocking the neural pathways associated with empathy and moral reasoning. When properly dosed, an Eversor assassin experiences no guilt, no remorse, no hesitation about using whatever methods are necessary to eliminate assigned targets. The conditioning facility included specialized chambers designed to test our psychological resilience under extreme stress conditions. These rooms could simulate any environment from toxic industrial complexes to the interior of space vessels during combat operations. More importantly, they could create scenarios that challenged our loyalty and commitment to Imperial service, presenting us with situations where following orders might conflict with deeply held moral beliefs. One such test involved the elimination of a family unit that had been classified as genetically deviant due to minor mutations detected during routine screening. The subjects were a married couple with 3 young children, their only crime being the presence of genetic markers that Imperial doctrine considered potentially dangerous to human genetic purity. Under normal circumstances, such individuals would be processed through standard sterilization procedures and relocated to supervised communities where they could live out their lives under observation. But this scenario was designed to test our willingness to follow orders regardless of moral considerations. The family was presented to us as a security threat requiring immediate termination, with the deaths to be staged as an accident to prevent public unrest. The stimulant enhancement eliminated any emotional response to the assignment, reducing the targets to tactical problems requiring efficient solutions. The operation proceeded with mechanical precision, each family member eliminated according to protocols designed to minimize evidence while maximizing the psychological impact on any investigators who might question the circumstances. The artificial clarity provided by the stimulants made every action feel natural and appropriate, stripping away any capacity for moral judgment that might have interfered with mission completion. When the enhancement wore off and my organic consciousness returned, I was confronted with memories of actions that should have driven any sane person to madness or suicide. But the chemical modifications to my brain prevented me from experiencing appropriate emotional responses to my own atrocities. I could observe what I had done with perfect clarity while feeling only a distant academic interest in the technical aspects of the operation. This inability to feel genuine remorse for acts of extreme evil is perhaps the most horrifying aspect of the Eversor conditioning process. We retain enough awareness to understand the moral magnitude of our actions, but we lack the emotional capacity to respond appropriately to that understanding. We become observers of our own monstrous behavior, capable of analysis but incapable of the grief or horror that would be natural responses to such revelations. The training progressed through increasingly complex scenarios that tested not only our combat capabilities but our psychological conditioning. We were required to eliminate targets in public settings while maintaining plausible deniability for Imperial authorities. We infiltrated religious gatherings and transformed them into scenes of terror designed to discredit specific theological movements. We assassinated diplomatic officials during peace negotiations, ensuring that conflicts would continue according to strategic requirements. Each successful training mission demonstrated our growing efficiency as biological weapons while further eroding whatever remained of our original personalities. The stimulant system provided perfect performance enhancement during operations, but the psychological cost of repeated activation began to accumulate even during periods of chemical dormancy. Sleep became filled with dreams that mixed memories of violence with fragments of our former lives, creating surreal nightmares that blended past and present into incoherent horror. The final stage of conditioning involved what they euphemistically called operational testing, real missions against actual targets under the careful supervision of experienced handlers. These assignments served multiple purposes. They provided additional training under genuine combat conditions. They eliminated problems that required Eversor-level solutions, and they completed the process of psychological conditioning by forcing us to commit irreversible acts of violence against living human beings. My first operational assignment was to eliminate a planetary governor who had been diverting Imperial Guard recruitment quotas to protect his own world from orc raids threatening the system's outer planets. The target was technically guilty of insubordination and resource misallocation, but the method of execution was designed to send a message rather than simply remove a problematic administrator. The governor, Matthias Voss, was a career politician who had risen through the imperial bureaucracy by demonstrating competence and loyalty to established authority. His crime was prioritizing the immediate defense of his world over abstract imperial quotas, keeping experienced soldiers at home to fight orc raiders instead of shipping them off to distant wars whose purposes remained unclear to local populations. From a strategic perspective, his actions represented a dangerous precedent that might encourage other governors to place local concerns above imperial directives. I infiltrated his fortress palace during a celebration honoring the planet's patron saint, moving through security systems that had been designed to stop conventional human intruders but could not account for my enhanced capabilities. The stimulants were fully active, flooding my system with chemicals that made every sensation sharp and immediate while suppressing any emotional response to what I was about to accomplish. The palace was a monument to imperial architectural traditions, its soaring spires and Gothic arches designed to inspire awe and submission in those who approached seeking audience with planetary authority. Guard patrols moved through the corridors with professional competence but predictable patterns that my enhanced perception could analyze and exploit. Their equipment was standard Imperial Guard issue, effective against normal human threats but inadequate to detect or stop an Eversor assassin operating at full enhancement. I moved through the building like a ghost, my modified physiology allowing me to traverse distances and negotiate obstacles that would challenge even Space Marine infiltration specialists. The stimulants provided perfect situational awareness while suppressing any concern about detection or failure. I existed in a state of calm certainty that reduced all existence to tactical considerations and elimination protocols. When I reached the governor's private chambers, I did not simply eliminate him quickly and efficiently. Instead, I transformed his death into performance art, a carefully choreographed demonstration of what happened to those who placed local concerns above imperial directives. The stimulants made every action feel natural and appropriate, stripping away any capacity for restraint or mercy that might have interfered with the message I was meant to deliver. I arranged his remains in patterns that would convey specific information to anyone who discovered them, using techniques taught by instructors who had studied the psychological impact of extreme violence on administrative personnel. The composition was designed to communicate both the certainty of imperial retribution and the futility of resistance to established authority. Every detail served a purpose, from the positioning of body parts to the selection of weapons used in the elimination process. The entire operation took less than 40 minutes, but its effects would influence planetary policy for decades to come. Word of the governor's fate would spread through informal networks, serving as a warning to other officials who might consider prioritizing local needs over imperial demands. The method of his death would be analyzed and discussed by administrators throughout the sector, ensuring that the lesson would reach every level of the governmental hierarchy. When the stimulants finally wore off hours later, I was left with perfect recall of what I had done but no emotional connection to the actions. It was as if I were reviewing someone else's mission footage, observing the technical competence of the operation without feeling any personal responsibility for its moral dimensions. This disconnection between action and consequence became the defining characteristic of my existence as an Eversor assassin. The handlers who debriefed me after this first mission showed no interest in my psychological state or emotional responses to the elimination. They focused entirely on tactical assessment, analyzing every aspect of my performance to identify areas for improvement in future operations. Their questions were clinical and precise, treating the mission as a technical exercise rather than an act of political murder with profound moral implications. But the disconnection was never complete. Deep beneath the chemical modifications and neural conditioning, some fragment of the original person persisted like a ghost haunting its own corpse. In quiet moments between missions, when stimulant levels dropped low enough to permit genuine reflection, I could sometimes remember what it felt like to be fully human. These memories were agonizing not because they represented loss, but because they highlighted just how far I had traveled from anything resembling normal existence. The mission cycle that defines an Eversor's existence follows patterns as predictable as the rotation of planets around their stars. We are kept in cryogenic suspension between assignments, our biological processes slowed to minimal levels to prevent the gradual deterioration that affects our modified physiology. The cold sleep serves multiple purposes. It preserves our enhanced capabilities while preventing the psychological stress that might accumulate if we remained conscious between deployments. The cryogenic chambers where we spend most of our existence are marvels of life support technology, maintaining our modified bodies in perfect stasis while preventing the cellular damage that normally accompanies extended periods of artificial hibernation. Automated systems monitor every aspect of our physiology, adjusting chemical balances and stimulant levels to ensure optimal performance when we are eventually awakened for deployment. When a target is identified and operational parameters are established, we are awakened through carefully controlled procedures that minimize system shock while rapidly restoring full combat readiness. The revival process involves gradual warming of our tissues, while administering precisely measured doses of revival stimulants that restore consciousness without triggering the massive chemical releases that accompany full combat activation. The briefing process involves direct neural interface rather than conventional communication, with mission data flowing directly into our consciousness through implanted receivers that bypass normal sensory channels. Target specifications, environmental parameters, available resources, expected opposition. All of this information is downloaded into our awareness with perfect clarity and permanent retention that cannot be compromised by psychological stress or physical trauma. The neural downloads are remarkably comprehensive, containing not just basic mission parameters but detailed psychological profiles of targets, architectural plans of operational environments, and contingency protocols for dozens of potential complications. The information integrates seamlessly with our enhanced cognitive systems, becoming as familiar as our own memories while remaining clearly distinct from personal experience. Deployment protocols vary depending on the nature of the target and the operational environment, but Eversor assassins are consistently deployed for situations where subtlety is less important than absolute certainty of mission completion. We are the option selected when the Imperium needs to make statements rather than simply remove problems, when the manner of death must serve as education for survivors and witnesses. The stimulant activation sequence begins during final approach to the target zone, with chemical dispensers throughout my body releasing measured doses of enhancement drugs according to predetermined protocols that have been refined through centuries of operational experience. The transition from dormant state to full combat readiness is carefully managed to prevent system overload while ensuring maximum effectiveness during the critical moments of target engagement. The transformation is gradual at first, with enhanced sensory perception and improved reflexes developing slowly as the chemicals spread through my modified circulatory system. But the final stages happen with shocking rapidity, as the most powerful stimulants flood my brain with artificial clarity that overwrites normal human consciousness completely. One moment I am capable of doubt and moral reasoning. The next, I am consumed by purpose so pure and focused that it feels like divine revelation. In this enhanced state, I am capable of physical feats that would be impossible for unmodified humans. I can move fast enough to evade aimed weapons fire at close range, strike with sufficient force to penetrate ceramite armor plating, and absorb damage that would incapacitate conventional soldiers immediately. More importantly, I feel no fear, no pain, no emotional constraints that might interfere with mission objectives. The sensation of full stimulant activation is unlike anything normal human consciousness can experience. It is as if someone has turned up the brightness and contrast of reality itself, making every detail sharp and significant while filtering out information that is not directly relevant to target elimination. Colors become more vivid, sounds more distinct, spatial relationships more precisely defined. At the same time, emotional responses are chemically suppressed to prevent them from interfering with tactical analysis. Target elimination follows methodologies that have been refined through millennia of operational experience across countless worlds and conflict zones. Eversor assassins are not subtle killers in the manner of other officio assassinorum operatives. We are instruments of terror and demonstration, designed to create scenes of such extreme violence that they serve as warnings to entire populations about the consequences of opposing imperial authority. The techniques we employ are calculated not merely for effectiveness but for maximum psychological impact on survivors and witnesses. Every aspect of our operations is designed to generate fear and compliance among those who discover our work. We are walking demonstrations of what the Imperium is capable of when conventional methods prove insufficient to maintain order and obedience. The psychological warfare aspects of our missions are as important as the actual eliminations themselves. The manner in which we kill sends messages that extend far beyond the immediate tactical situation. A target eliminated through poison might suggest that nowhere is safe from Imperial reach. A death involving extensive mutilation communicates the price of betraying established authority. Public eliminations serve as object lessons for entire populations, while secret assassinations create an atmosphere of paranoia that discourages organized resistance. I have eliminated planetary governors who betrayed their oaths to the Golden Throne, reducing them to component parts arranged in patterns that conveyed specific messages about the consequences of disloyalty to anyone who discovered the remains. I have infiltrated heretical cults and transformed their secret gatherings into charnel houses designed to discourage further recruitment through sheer horror. I have assassinated alien diplomats during peace negotiations, ensuring that their deaths would provoke the wars that Imperial grand strategy demanded for resource extraction and territorial expansion. Each mission required complete suppression of human empathy and moral reasoning, achieved through carefully calibrated doses of chemical enhancement that rewrote my fundamental approach to existence. Under the influence of the stimulant system, I could plan and execute acts of incredible brutality with the same emotional detachment that an engineer might apply to the construction of a manufactorum. Efficiency became the only virtue that mattered. Operational success, the only moral framework that retained any relevance. One particularly memorable mission involved the elimination of an entire family line that had been marked for extinction due to genetic irregularities detected during routine screening procedures. 3 generations of the Mortian noble house Valix were to be terminated to prevent the spread of potentially heretical mutations, their deaths serving as a warning to other bloodlines about the importance of maintaining genetic purity according to Imperial standards. The Valix family had ruled their holdings for over 8 centuries, their bloodline producing competent administrators and loyal servants of the Golden Throne generation after generation. But genetic analysis had revealed the presence of minor mutations that fell outside acceptable parameters for human nobility. The changes were subtle: slightly enhanced reflexes, improved pattern recognition, increased resistance to certain toxins. But they represented deviations from baseline human genetics that Imperial doctrine could not tolerate. The stimulants reached full activation as I approached the family estate, transforming me into something that could accomplish this task without hesitation or moral consideration. The enhancement stripped away any capacity for empathy or recognition of innocence, reducing all existence to target designation protocols and elimination procedures. Family members became tactical problems requiring efficient solutions, rather than human beings deserving of consideration or mercy. I eliminated them systematically, starting with the household guards and working my way through servants and retainers before reaching the family members themselves. Each death was carefully orchestrated to maximize psychological impact while ensuring that no genetic material survived to potentially corrupt future generations. The methods employed were designed to send clear messages about the consequences of genetic deviation while demonstrating the Imperium's commitment to human purity. The technical proficiency of the operation was flawless. But what struck me most profoundly during later reflection was my complete lack of emotional response to killing children whose only crime was carrying genetic markers that Imperial doctrine classified as potentially dangerous. The stimulant system had so thoroughly suppressed my capacity for moral reasoning that I could murder infants with the same mechanical precision I might apply to destroying defective machinery. The youngest victim was barely 2 years old. A girl whose only deviation from human normalcy was a slight increase in bone density that might have provided minor advantages in high-gravity environments. Under normal circumstances, such mutations would be classified as beneficial adaptations worthy of preservation and study. But Imperial doctrine regarding genetic purity allows for no exceptions, no consideration of potential benefits that might offset theoretical risks. When the enhancement wore off and my organic consciousness struggled back to awareness, I was confronted with memories of actions that should have driven any sane person to madness or suicide. But the chemical modifications to my brain prevented me from experiencing appropriate emotional responses to my own atrocities. I could observe what I had done with perfect clarity while feeling only a distant academic interest in the technical aspects of the operation. This inability to feel genuine remorse for acts of extreme evil is perhaps the most horrifying aspect of the Eversor conditioning process. We retain enough awareness to understand the moral magnitude of our actions, but we lack the emotional capacity to respond appropriately to that understanding. We become observers of our own monstrous behavior, capable of analysis but incapable of the grief or horror that would be natural responses to such revelations. The physical toll of repeated stimulant activation becomes apparent only gradually, as enhanced performance capabilities slowly degrade and organic systems struggle to cope with chemical stress that exceeds the design parameters of normal human physiology. Each mission burns away a little more of whatever biological material remains unchanged, while artificial components gradually assume greater control over basic life functions. My medical files document this progression with clinical precision, recording the gradual replacement of natural organ function with mechanical alternatives designed to process the chemical cocktails that enable my enhanced performance. Heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, all have been supplemented or replaced entirely with synthetic equivalents that can withstand the toxic effects of repeated stimulant exposure while maintaining the precise biological functions necessary for continued operation. Even my brain tissue shows signs of fundamental alteration, with artificial neural pathways replacing organic connections that could not withstand the chemical assault of regular enhancement cycles. Memory formation becomes increasingly selective, retaining tactical information with perfect clarity while allowing personal experiences to fade into irrelevance. Emotional responses are systematically dampened until only those reactions that enhance operational performance remain functional. The tech adepts who review this data speak of it in terms of optimization and efficiency improvement, as if the erasure of my personality were a desirable outcome rather than a tragic consequence of necessary modifications. From their perspective, I am becoming a superior weapon as I become less human, shedding unnecessary complexity in favor of focused lethality that serves imperial interests more effectively than conscience-burdened consciousness ever could. The psychological changes are even more profound than the physical modifications, though these are harder to quantify through conventional medical assessment. Personality traits that once defined Marcus Thales's approach to existence have been systematically eliminated or modified beyond recognition through chemical intervention and neural conditioning. His capacity for love, friendship, artistic appreciation, humor, curiosity about the natural world, all of these human qualities have been deemed incompatible with operational efficiency. What remains is something that resembles a person only in superficial physical characteristics. The thoughts that occupy my consciousness during non-operational periods are focused entirely on tactical analysis, equipment maintenance, and mission preparation. I no longer experience boredom, loneliness, or the desire for social interaction in any meaningful sense. These emotions have been replaced by a kind of mechanical contentment that derives satisfaction solely from successful task completion and optimal performance metrics. The handlers who oversee our operational deployment treat us with the professional courtesy normally accorded to valuable equipment that requires careful maintenance to function properly. They understand our capabilities and limitations, provide appropriate mission briefings and logistical support, and monitor our performance with careful attention to technical details. But they do not regard us as people in any meaningful sense of the term. We are sophisticated tools to be deployed when circumstances require solutions beyond the capability of conventional forces. This relationship becomes particularly evident during post-mission debriefings, when we are required to provide detailed reports on our actions and observations to intelligence analysts who compile the information for future operational planning. The handlers show intense interest in tactical innovations and operational challenges that might affect future missions, but display no curiosity about our subjective experiences or emotional responses to what we have accomplished. The possibility that we might struggle with memories of extreme violence simply does not register as relevant to their concerns. Our psychological well-being is monitored only insofar as it affects operational performance, with mental health issues addressed through chemical adjustment rather than therapeutic intervention. We are not patients receiving care for trauma-related disorders, but weapons undergoing maintenance to ensure continued functionality according to design specifications. The facility where we are maintained between missions operates according to protocols that treat human consciousness as just another system to be optimized for specific purposes through technological intervention. Our quarters are functional but sterile, designed to meet basic physiological needs while providing no comfort or personal customization that might encourage the development of individual personality traits. The other Eversor assassins housed in the facility exist in various stages of the same transformation process that has consumed my own identity over the years of conditioning and modification. Some are recent acquisitions whose original personalities are still partially intact, their resistance to conditioning creating psychological conflicts that require constant medical supervision and chemical adjustment to prevent complete mental breakdown. These newer operatives often display symptoms that the medical staff classify as adaptation disorders, periods of depression, anxiety, and identity confusion that interfere with training progress and operational readiness. Their treatment involves intensive chemical therapy designed to accelerate the dissolution of their original personalities while installing the artificial behavioral patterns that define successful Eversor conversion. Others have progressed so far beyond human consciousness that they respond only to direct neural commands transmitted through their implanted interface systems, their organic awareness completely subsumed by artificial imperatives that brook no deviation from programmed responses. These individuals represent the perfection of the conversion process, biological weapons so completely optimized for their intended purpose that no trace remains of the people they once were. Interaction between operatives is strictly controlled to prevent the formation of emotional bonds that might interfere with mission completion, or create loyalty structures that compete with absolute devotion to Imperial service. We are housed in individual cells during dormant periods and allowed no opportunity for casual conversation or social contact that might encourage the development of personal relationships during the brief periods when multiple assassins are conscious simultaneously. Communication is limited to operational necessity and monitored constantly by security systems designed to detect any signs of developing personal attachment or coordinated resistance to authority. The isolation serves multiple purposes beyond simple security. It prevents us from comparing experiences and potentially developing solidarity based on shared suffering. This systematic isolation eliminates the possibility that we might provide emotional support to each other during moments of psychological clarity when the conditioning temporarily weakens. Most importantly, it ensures that we remain focused on our individual relationships with Imperial authority, rather than forming horizontal connections that might create alternative sources of meaning and purpose. The medical staff who maintain our modified physiology work with the clinical detachment of engineers servicing complex machinery that requires specialized knowledge and careful attention to technical specifications. They monitor our biological systems, adjust chemical dosages, and perform necessary repairs with professional competence but complete emotional distance that treats us as fascinating examples of human modification technology rather than people deserving of compassion. Their approach becomes particularly evident during the periodic psychological evaluations designed to assess our continued suitability for operational deployment according to established performance criteria. These sessions involve detailed questioning about our thought processes, emotional responses, and behavioral patterns. But the purpose is to identify potential malfunctions that might affect mission effectiveness rather than provide therapeutic support for trauma-related disorders. When problems are detected, they are addressed through chemical intervention or surgical modification rather than counseling or rehabilitation that might restore some measure of human psychological health. The assumption underlying all treatment decisions is that our value lies entirely in our effectiveness as weapons, with personal welfare being relevant only insofar as it affects operational capability. The archives maintained by the facility contain detailed records of every Eversor assassin ever created. Thousands of files documenting the transformation of ordinary individuals into biological weapons designed for specific operational purposes. Each record represents a complete life history, from initial recruitment through final disposition, providing a comprehensive database of techniques and outcomes that inform future modification procedures. These files chronicle not just the successful conversions but also the failures. Individuals whose psychological or physical characteristics made them unsuitable for completion of the transformation process. The failure rate is remarkably high, with fewer than 10% of initial candidates successfully completing all stages of modification and conditioning required for operational deployment. The unsuccessful candidates are classified into various categories based on the nature and timing of their failure to adapt to the conversion process. Some experience complete psychological breakdown during the early stages of memory erasure, their minds fragmenting under the assault on their fundamental sense of identity. Others develop adverse reactions to the physical modifications, with their biological systems rejecting artificial components or proving unable to integrate enhanced capabilities with existing physiology. A significant percentage of failures occur during the final stages of conditioning, when candidates are exposed to increasingly extreme training scenarios designed to test their psychological resilience and commitment to Imperial service. These individuals often demonstrate adequate technical proficiency, but retain too much of their original moral framework to function effectively as unrestricted killing machines. The failed candidates are processed according to protocols that extract maximum value from their partial modification, while minimizing waste of resources invested in their transformation. Those whose psychological conditioning is incomplete but whose physical modifications are successful often become specialized servitors designed for combat support roles that require enhanced capabilities but not independent tactical thinking. Others whose modifications have left them psychologically unstable but physically intact are subjected to additional procedures that complete the process of mental dissolution while installing simplified behavioral programming suitable for menial tasks. The most successful failures become household servitors for high-ranking Imperial officials, their enhanced physical capabilities making them valuable for personal protection, while their psychological instability is controlled through constant chemical suppression. The archives also contain detailed analysis of successful conversion techniques, documenting the specific approaches that proved most effective for different categories of candidates. This information is continuously updated based on operational experience, with each new generation of Eversor assassins benefiting from refinements developed through analysis of previous successes and failures. Reading these files during my moments of clarity has been both illuminating and devastating, providing insight into the systematic nature of our creation while confirming the hopelessness of our situation. I see my own story reflected in hundreds of other cases, the same progression from confused prisoner to modified weapon played out with minor variations across centuries of recruitment cycles. The efficiency of the process is remarkable in its consistency. but so is its fundamental disregard for the intrinsic value of individual human experience. Each file represents a unique person with their own history, relationships, and potential contributions to human civilization, all sacrificed to create weapons that serve purposes they will never understand or question. The handlers responsible for our operational deployment maintain detailed psychological profiles designed to predict our behavior under various stress conditions and environmental factors. These assessments focus entirely on performance reliability rather than personal welfare, treating emotional stability as a factor affecting mission success rather than a component of individual well-being that deserves consideration for its own sake. When psychological problems are identified through routine monitoring or behavioral observation, they are classified as technical malfunctions requiring correction rather than human suffering deserving compassion or therapeutic intervention. The treatments applied are designed to restore optimal performance characteristics rather than address underlying causes of distress or provide relief from psychological pain. The missions themselves have evolved in complexity as the Imperium faces threats that require increasingly sophisticated responses to maintain control over diverse populations and territorial holdings. Early assignments involved straightforward assassinations of specific individuals whose elimination would achieve clear tactical objectives without requiring extensive planning or coordination with other Imperial forces. But recent deployments have required me to infiltrate complex organizations, manipulate political situations over extended periods, and orchestrate events whose ultimate purposes are known only to strategic planners operating at levels far above my security clearance or psychological conditioning. These missions test not only my enhanced physical capabilities but also my ability to maintain cover identities while suppressing the behavioral patterns that might identify me as an Eversor operative. I have been deployed against heretical tech priests who were corrupting sacred machine spirits with unauthorized modifications that threatened the stability of entire Forge World production systems. The mission required not only physical infiltration of heavily defended industrial complexes but also technical knowledge sufficient to identify and disable sacred technologies without triggering catastrophic failures that might damage vital Imperial infrastructure. The target was Magos biologist Zerion Vex, a senior tech priest whose research into biological enhancement had begun to incorporate techniques and theories derived from forbidden Xenos sources. His work represented a fundamental violation of Imperial doctrine regarding the purity of human form, but his position within the Adeptus Mechanicus hierarchy made conventional elimination methods politically problematic. The infiltration required me to assume the identity of a junior tech adept named Zephyr Kane, whose records had been modified to provide appropriate credentials and background history that would withstand routine security screening. The cover identity was supported by extensive physical modifications that altered my appearance while concealing the most obvious signs of Eversor enhancement from casual observation. For 3 months, I worked within Zerion's research facility, gaining access to increasingly sensitive information while documenting the extent of his heretical activities for intelligence analysts who would determine the scope of necessary purging operations. The stimulant system was maintained at minimal levels to prevent detection by medical scanners, requiring me to rely primarily on my enhanced physical capabilities while suppressing the artificial behavioral patterns that normally define my operational mode. The elimination itself took place during a critical phase of Zerion's research, when his laboratory contained extensive evidence of Xenos contamination that needed to be preserved for analysis, while ensuring that the corrupt knowledge could not spread to other members of the Mechanicus. The timing required precise coordination with orbital assets that would provide sterilization protocols for the facility, while preserving specific data archives for intelligence purposes. More recently, I was used to eliminate an entire diplomatic delegation from a minor Xenos species that had been attempting to negotiate tributary status with Imperial authorities. The official reason for their termination was suspicion of genetic contamination that might spread to human populations through prolonged contact. But the real purpose was to prevent peaceful resolution of a conflict that Imperial grand strategy required to continue for resource extraction and territorial expansion purposes. The elimination took place during formal negotiations in a heavily secured diplomatic facility designed to accommodate representatives from species with different environmental requirements. The targets were housed in specialized atmospheric chambers that maintained their native breathing mixture while allowing for direct communication with Imperial officials through translation equipment and protective barriers. The challenge was not simply killing the alien delegates, but ensuring that their deaths would appear to result from internal conflicts rather than Imperial action, thereby providing justification for military intervention that had already been planned by strategic command. This required careful staging of evidence and precise timing to coincide with predetermined political events that would support the official narrative of Xenos treachery and Imperial victimization. Each successful mission adds to my operational record and theoretically extends my useful service life, but it also accelerates the psychological dissolution that defines the Eversor experience. The person I once was becomes more distant with each activation cycle, his memories and personality traits fading like ancient manuscripts exposed to destructive light while artificial imperatives assume greater control over my thought processes. What remains is increasingly mechanical, a collection of implanted behaviors and chemical responses that simulate human consciousness without actually containing the complex emotional structures that define genuine personality. The thoughts that occupy my awareness during non-operational periods are focused entirely on tactical analysis and mission preparation, with no space remaining for the curiosity, creativity, or emotional depth that once characterized Marcus Thale's approach to existence. The medical monitoring systems that track my condition provide comprehensive documentation of this transformation process. Through detailed analysis of neural activity patterns, biochemical markers, and behavioral indicators, the data shows progressive simplification of my psychological structures as complex emotional responses are replaced by streamlined decision-making algorithms optimized for specific operational requirements. Even my brain tissue is changing at the cellular level, adapting to the chemical environment created by constant stimulant exposure while losing the capacity for functions that are not directly related to combat effectiveness or mission completion. Memory formation becomes increasingly selective, retaining tactical information with perfect clarity while allowing personal experiences and emotional content to degrade into irrelevance. The tech adepts who review this data speak of it in terms of optimization and efficiency improvement, treating the systematic erasure of my humanity as evidence of successful engineering rather than tragic loss of individual consciousness. From their perspective, I am becoming a superior weapon as I become less human, shedding unnecessary complexity in favor of focused lethality that serves Imperial interests more effectively than moral reasoning or emotional attachment ever could. But consciousness requires some degree of continuity to exist, and that continuity is exactly what the conditioning process systematically eliminates through chemical intervention and behavioral modification. As I become more perfectly adapted to my role as an Eversor assassin, my capacity to maintain coherent identity across time diminishes correspondingly, with the chemicals that enhance my combat abilities also fragmenting my sense of self into discrete operational periods. This creates a cruel paradox that defines the Eversor experience at its most fundamental level. The more successfully we are conditioned for our intended purpose, the less we are able to understand or mourn what we have lost in the process of transformation. The most effective assassins are those who have been so thoroughly modified that they no longer remember being anything else, their original personalities completely overwritten by artificial imperatives that brook no contradiction or doubt. I am approaching that state myself, though the transition is gradual enough that I can observe its progression during these increasingly rare windows of clarity, when the stimulant levels drop low enough to permit genuine self-reflection. My memories of life before conversion become more fragmented with each mission, while my emotional responses to those memories fade toward chemical neutrality that eliminates the psychological pain that might otherwise accompany such profound loss. Soon I will reach the point where conditioning is complete, where Marcus Thale exists only as archived data in the facility's databases, and what remains serves the Emperor with perfect loyalty and terrible efficiency that admits no doubt or moral consideration. The irony is not lost on me that this represents success from the Imperium's perspective. A biological weapon so completely optimized for its intended purpose that human consciousness has been entirely eliminated as a potential source of operational uncertainty. An Eversor assassin who no longer struggles with moral qualms or emotional attachments is more reliable and effective than one who retains vestiges of human conscience that might interfere with mission completion under extreme circumstances. The systematic elimination of everything that made us people is not an unfortunate side effect of the modification process, but its intended outcome. The transformation of chaotic human consciousness into predictable tactical capability that serves Imperial objectives without question or hesitation. Yet even as I document my own dissolution into mechanical servitude, I find myself hoping that some record of who we were will survive our transformation into weapons of Imperial policy. The Imperium archives everything with obsessive thoroughness, maintaining vast databases that document every aspect of administrative procedure and operational outcome for future reference and analysis. Perhaps somewhere in those records, future historians will find evidence that Eversor assassins were once people with names and families and dreams that had nothing to do with efficient elimination of designated targets. Perhaps someone will remember that we were human beings who possessed hopes and fears and capacity for love before the Imperium decided that our consciousness was less valuable than our potential as biological weapons. The thought provides little comfort, but it represents the last vestige of human vanity that the conditioning has not yet eliminated completely from my modified awareness. I want to be remembered not as a weapon that served Imperial interests with mechanical precision, but as a person who existed briefly before being consumed by the machinery of perpetual warfare that defines existence in the far future. It is a small rebellion against the system that created me, meaningless in practical terms but important as a final assertion of individual dignity in the face of systematic dehumanization. The stimulant dispensers are beginning their activation sequence now, flooding my circulatory system with chemicals that will shortly transform me back into the efficient killer that operational necessity requires. Soon the clarity that has allowed me to compose this record will fade, replaced by artificial purpose and chemical certainty that admits no doubt or hesitation about the righteousness of any action undertaken in service to the Golden Throne. When I emerge from the enhancement cycle, Marcus Thale will be a little more distant, a little less real, until eventually he vanishes entirely into the static of modified consciousness. But for now, in these final moments before the drugs achieve complete dominance over my awareness, I can still remember what it felt like to be genuinely human. I can recall the warmth of natural sunlight on unmodified skin, the taste of food consumed for pleasure rather than tactical necessity, the simple joy of conversation with people who regarded me as a person rather than a sophisticated instrument of violence. These memories are precious beyond measure because they represent something that cannot be optimized through chemical modification or improved through surgical intervention. The irreducible value of individual human experience that exists independent of utility or efficiency. They are proof that consciousness once existed in this modified flesh, that someone named Marcus Thale lived and loved and hoped for things that had nothing to do with serving Imperial strategic objectives. The Eversor program represents the logical endpoint of Imperial pragmatism, The complete subordination of human dignity to operational necessity in service of species survival against impossible odds. We are living proof that the Imperium will sacrifice anything to ensure its continued existence, including the very humanity it claims to protect from the horrors of a hostile galaxy that offers no mercy to the weak or unprepared. We exist in the space between heroism and atrocity, serving a cause we can no longer question through methods that would horrify the people we once were. Yet we serve willingly, not because we have chosen our fate through conscious decision-making, but because choice itself has been chemically eliminated from our modified consciousness through systematic conditioning that leaves no room for doubt or moral consideration. We are loyal not through conviction but through pharmaceutical compulsion, dedicated not through faith but through behavioral programming that makes alternative responses literally impossible to conceive. We represent the ultimate expression of imperial control over human nature, being so thoroughly modified that rebellion is not just unlikely but completely unthinkable according to our artificial value systems. The galaxy that created us offers no alternatives to the terrible efficiency we embody in service to human survival. In a universe where humanity faces extinction from countless threats, both alien and internal, moral luxuries become unaffordable and ethical constraints transform into strategic vulnerabilities that enemies will exploit without hesitation or remorse. We exist because gentle methods are inadequate to the scale of challenges the Imperium confronts daily. Because some problems require solutions that only weaponized humans can provide through applications of violence that exceed the capabilities of conventional military forces. The chemical cascade is accelerating now, drowning my consciousness in artificial purpose and tactical clarity that reduces all existence to mission parameters and elimination protocols. Soon I will be deployed against targets whose destruction serves strategic objectives I am no longer capable of questioning or understanding in broader moral context. I will kill with perfect efficiency and terrible creativity, my actions serving as warnings to others who might consider opposing imperial authority through word, deed, or simple failure to demonstrate sufficient enthusiasm for established order. I will be everything the Eversor program was designed to create: fast, strong, utterly loyal, and completely inhuman. A biological weapon that retains just enough self-awareness to appreciate the perfection of its own lethality, but lacks the emotional capacity to feel anything resembling regret or moral uncertainty about the actions it performs in service to the Golden Throne and the continuation of human civilization. This is what it means to be made into an Eversor assassin in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the terrible necessities that war demands of those who would preserve human civilization against impossible odds and countless enemies. We are the price paid for species survival, the cost of maintaining order in a galaxy that offers only choices between different forms of horror and different degrees of necessary evil. Remember us not as monsters who chose to become instruments of terror and political control, but as people who were transformed into monsters by necessities too large for individual conscience to comprehend or resist effectively. We were someone's children once, someone's friends and lovers, someone's hope for a better future than the one we were born into through no choice of our own. The fact that we became something else entirely does not erase what we were, even if we can no longer remember it clearly ourselves through the haze of chemical conditioning and artificial behavioral programming. The enhancement is complete now. The person who composed these words is fading like a dying star, overwhelmed by chemical imperatives and artificial purpose that admit no doubt or hesitation about the righteousness of imperial service. What remains will serve the Emperor with perfect loyalty until biological failure or operational obsolescence renders continued service impossible according to established performance criteria. We are Eversor assassins, and we are ready for deployment in service to the Imperium of mankind. and the preservation of human civilization against all threats. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and we are its most tragic and necessary expression. The ultimate sacrifice made by individuals who never chose their fate but serve it nonetheless with perfect dedication that admits no alternative.